Hello my friends, I'm Duchess and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today I'm going to give you guys some tips on the composition of speech balloons that will help you guys to make your webtoon look easy to read and pleasing to the eye. Let's get started. Disclaimer, I'm not a professional artist or a webtoon creator, but these are my tips on bubble composition. Thank you so much to Chariots8x again for another video request. I'm truly grateful for you and I really appreciate you asking me such great questions. Alright, so the first thing that I want to talk about is spacing, which I have talked about before. So spacing really helps to set the mood for whatever you're creating. If there's not a lot of space between your space bubbles, then things may seem a bit muddled or squished altogether. It can have two effects. Either it looks really messy and unorganized, or it looks like a lot of things are happening at once and things are just really hectic. There's a slight difference between the two. If you have bubbles close together without a lot of spacing in between, but it's neat and it's not too confusing to read or understand who is speaking, then it's just hectic. If there's not much spacing between bubbles and you can't really understand who's speaking and it's hard to read, then it's messy and unorganized. I would definitely try to avoid making it look messy and unorganized, but I think it's okay for it to be hectic depending on the effect that you want. If you're trying to make a scene that has all of these things happening at the same time, then it's probably okay to have the speech bubbles and panels a little closer together, but there should still be some space between to allow the readers to process what they've read. Having all these bubbles close together may make it harder to read and it's not very pretty looking. Another component is having big speech bubbles. I've read a few traditional paper comics when I was younger, and I know that the bubbles are pretty tight and there's not a lot of space between bubbles and panels because they're literally right next to each other or within each other, and that's the style for paper comics. But for webtoons, it's better to have bigger bubbles that have space. It's easier to read and it looks much better. When you read webtoons, pay attention to the spacing in the bubbles. You'll notice that when the characters speak, their words or the dialogue only fills up the center part of the speech bubble, and it's not touching the edges of the bubble. It has a lot of space and it makes it easy for us readers to read. We don't have to squint our eyes and try to figure out who's speaking or try to understand what was written. This brings me to another point, which is to make it clear who is speaking. Speech and thought bubbles usually have this little hook, or the trail of bubbles that leads to the character, which indicates who's speaking. I've read some webtoons where it's not really clear who's speaking. It may look pretty, but it's best not to confuse the readers. We want to make our webtoon something enjoyable for them and for them to have a good experience while reading our webtoon, not make them struggle to figure out who's speaking the entire time. So make sure you make it clear who is speaking. I would also advise that you not include too many speech bubbles per panel. For example, let's say that these two characters here are having a conversation. Conversations are long and they include many sentences, so it's probably going to last for a few panels. Instead of trying to cram this whole conversation into one or two panels, you can spread it out and spread out the speech bubbles. I would say that you should only have two characters speaking in a single panel, at most. Something I've picked up from reading webtoons is using double bubbles, or that's what I call it, but it's really helpful for longer conversations and it cuts your work in half. Instead of drawing another panel with a character speaking, you can use double bubbles for a longer conversation. Double bubbles link dialogue and it makes things a little bit easier for you as a creator. You would put the bubble here and this bubble here, and you have to be mindful of the spacing because you want the readers to read and understand the dialogue the way that they're supposed to. So here's how readers would read this. Since this bubble is the first bubble to come up on the screen, they'll read this one first from this character. Now the next bubble they see is from the other character, so they read what the other person says. Then the next dialogue is from the first person, and then from the second person again. So you can see that they're having a conversation back and forth, and that's the way that this conversation will flow. If you don't place the bubbles correctly or you place them in the wrong order, your readers might get confused, so be careful of that. If there's people talking in the background, that's okay. I would just write it in as a smaller text instead of in a speech bubble so that readers can read it if they're interested. However, that conversation isn't the main focus, so I don't really worry about it too much. The main focus is on the characters with the big speech bubbles. Another tip is to not draw your bubbles inside your panels. I feel like I might have said this before, but in comics, everything is kind of smushed together and it's not very spacious, which is fine. However, for webtoons, it's easier to read vertically because it's online and it's easier to read with more space. Webtoons and online comics focus more on the drawing, which doesn't mean that the writing is not important or anything, but drawing or the art of a webtoon series is very important. That is what can help to win readers over, and that's something that we want to display as webtoon creators. We want to show off our artwork, not hide it behind panels and words. So when you are adding in your speech and thought bubbles, don't cover up or block your panels with bubbles. Instead, leave lots of room for speech bubbles so only the little curve that points to the character speaking is in the panel. Like I said in my last video, it's unsatisfying to click on a webtoon, read it, and not see a lot of the beautiful artwork. That's something that lots of readers look forward to, and it can really make their reading experience more enjoyable. So those are my tips on speech bubble composition. I hope that this video answered the rest of your question, and thank you again for the request. That is all I have for you guys this week. If you guys enjoyed this week's video or learned something new, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and click the notification bell to get notified. Thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you next week.